Always a thrill to be back with you. This is my third series that I've done here, and I hope there are many more. I love your class. I love the setup. Special thanks to Jerry for making all this possible. And, excuse me. So thanks to Mike for making it all possible, and Jerry for videotaping. There we go. Got it backwards. And I want to start by telling you a story. Oh, hi. I want to tell you a story that is, I think, the way it goes for me a lot of times is I will think I know about something for years and years and years, and then find out that I didn't have it quite straight, right? For years and years and years, I tell my students in classes that Martin Luther was a monk. And then one day it just dawned on me, he couldn't possibly be a monk. He's teaching at a university. And I realized he wasn't a monk, couldn't be a monk, he was a friar, which means that he had the option of going out and working different places, which is exactly what he did. But it's so hard to break a habit, right? And yeah, and this is one of those. For 50 years, I've been teaching students about the Baroque period of art, from about 1600 to the French Revolution, almost 1800, that period of time. And certainly that was a flowering of the Baroque. But I finally realized that the Baroque is not a movement but a style. And I hope that by the time we're done with this, you'll understand maybe a little bit how Baroque influenced art and literature and stage and anything, any artistic endeavor usually has some Baroque influence. Now, one thing that makes this so, I think, very important to understand is how I was puzzled. How can the Baroque be such an unusual movement right in the middle of the neoclassical period? See, where everything is just so regular, and the Baroque is so irregular. So how could that be possible? But like a lot of things, I didn't question it. I just accepted it as a kind of a fact that this was an anomaly. But the fact is, it's not an anomaly at all. It's a style which just has come and comes, and still coming to this day. And I'll try to get to the bottom of that. Let me talk to you for a little bit about some of the issues that bring about the birth of the Baroque. Now, the term itself supposedly means irregular pearl, an irregular pearl. In other words, a thing of beauty, but it's not quite regular. This is the most nonsensical name there ever was, but I looked into this, and it turns out nobody really knows where the word Baroque came from. This is true of many words and phrases we have in English. Here's one. Here's one in English. Okay. Take a shot at that, where that came from. There are all kinds of theories, but nobody knows. Yeah, we say it all the time, right? Okay. Right? Like, it's been there forever, but it hadn't been there forever. Somewhere in the 1800s, people start saying, okay. Why? How? See? So the same as Baroque. Why would this movement in the classical period, or what's sometimes called the neoclassical, meaning it's not the ancient classical period, why would they think about irregularity? Well, once you understand what it's really about, then you can understand how it could have the concept of irregularity in it. So I want to put a word up here. Iconoclasm. Now, an icon in Greek is an image, right? And is that because the school has the bells at certain hours, is that it?
I don't know.
I have no idea. Okay, so this gets translated as image, icon, but when you boot up your computer, you get your icon page, all these images, and each image stands for usually a company or a program, something like that. And so we think nothing of it. We'll click on our favorite browser, which is an image of some kind, and go on. Now, chasm means to break. So then you have an iconoclast, an iconoclast, an icon breaker. Now, what in the world does that mean? Well, it means that we're dealing here now with church history. In church history, there evolved this huge, monumental conflict between the people on the one side who thought that icons are really important to the religious life of people. You'll see this in the Greek Orthodox Church. You'll see this in the Roman Catholic Church. You see all these icons in the form of paintings, murals, statues, things that represent divinity, right? And then you have people who do not believe that one should ever attempt to show the divinity or any aspect of it. Now, of course, I think underlying all of this is the influence of Islam, because Islam has always, from day one, been iconoclastic. Remember, Muhammad, the year 622 AD, this is the year that he goes on his famous jihad, his famous Hajj, that is his famous pilgrimage to Mecca with an army in tow, conquers Mecca, of course. And this is kind of the beginning of Islam. And Islam, the very first thing he does is go into the famous temple in Mecca called the Kaaba. Now, I'm going to just digress here for a minute. The Kaaba is supposedly the temple built by Adam when Adam and Eve were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. They had to go somewhere, and so they go to the place Mecca. Mecca, of course, is an oasis. So there they are, and Adam wants to build a temple to God. It's basically a stone building, not just a whole lot bigger than this room. Probably this room and the next room might be, it's actually a very small place, but it has in one corner of it a meteorite. And this that is encased in silver. And this meteorite is what every pilgrim goes to kiss. So imagine if COVID's going to spread, there'd be a real good place to spread it right there. Because millions go every year to Mecca on their Hajj. Just like Muhammad went on a Hajj, they go on a Hajj, right? And so this was built by Adam. Well, lo and behold, who should show up there but Abraham. Abraham, when he decides to take his wife Hagar and the son Ishmael and take them off into the desert, he travels for months on end to get far enough away so they can never get back. But he was supposed to put them out in the desert so they die. But instead of doing that, he doesn't put them in, he doesn't drop them in the desert to die. He leaves them in Mecca, at this oasis. and where this Kaaba is located. And there they thrive. And of course, Ishmael then becomes the leader of what we call today Islam. You see, until about a couple hundred years ago, Islam was called, the Muslims, we call Muslims, called Ishmaelites, followers of Ishmael. But the word Muslim has come because in Arabic it means the one who is submitted to God, or in their case, Allah. And so this idea of that Adam was there, and then Abraham is there, and then Muhammad is there, you see. And so this business of iconoclasm comes in when Muhammad gets to Kaaba. The Kaaba had been filled up with little icons, little statues, little images of various gods that those people worshipped at that time. And first thing he does is clean them all out. Now you will never see in Islam an image of deity, right? And I think the best way I can explain it is they evolved an art form called arabesque. Now arabesque, Arab, and then esque. For the most part, the Arabs, the word tribe is not big enough. I mean, as a movement of people, is almost always Islamic, right? I mean, there are Arabs that are Christian and so on, but generally speaking. But arabesque, where do we see arabesque? We see it, I see it every day, all day, because on our floor we have Persian rugs. Have you ever seen the design of a Persian rug? What is it? Is it anything that look like any people in there, horses? Or no. This is a beautiful design, right? By the way, those all started as prayer rugs, so that you could kneel down 5 times a day and point yourself to Mecca. I just laughed. I have a picture of this somewhere. When I was in Cairo, I spent a summer in Egypt. I'm in Cairo, and you're driving down the street, or walking down the street, and you hear the call to prayer, and these people just immediately, it's like robots, you know, they just know where east is, and they turn and they kneel down. The guy gets off his motorcycle in the middle of a gas station, and down he goes. But the station, this is the ultimate in marketing, they put out little prayer rugs. So people will come to their store, and then after it's over, oh look, there's something I need in the drawer. Amazing, right? So anyway, iconoclasm is at the heart of Islam. Now, it always seems to me, it isn't a coincidence that the great outbreaking of iconoclasm comes in the year, let's see if I can get the year right here, 726 AD. Now, 726 AD in the Byzantine Empire. Now, again, remind you of what the Byzantine Empire is. Way back, you have a Roman emperor by the name of Constantine. Now, we need to talk about Constantine here for just a little bit, because Constantine thinks of himself, what is this? Oh, excuse me, everybody. Constantine is a Roman emperor. The thing you've got to remember about Roman emperors is they have absolute power. They're dictators. So Constantine doesn't have to insult anybody. And he thinks, you know, Rome's a long way from what is now the center of the Roman Empire at that time. We have all these settlements, all of these Roman colonies in the east. So he just one day says, we're moving. You know, it's called the Roman Empire, right? And so in the east, he picks out a spot on the Bosporus, which is just the separating point between Europe and Asia. A little village there called Byzantium. Now Byzantium, then all of a sudden this little town becomes the Roman capital. Boom! It had one feature that caused it to be chosen. It has 7 hills, just like Rome. So Constantine just moves lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, it's amazing. It's like if the United States president had the power. I think we need to move the capital closer to the middle, you know. Let's go up to St. Louis, Kansas City, you know. They did this, by the way, in Brazil. The capital was Rio. You know, way and just isolate, I mean, one little corner of the country.
But it isn't better. I mean, it's where East meets West. Constantinople is
absolutely.
So it's a much better choice than St. Louis.
Well, I agree, because in the case of Brazil, they put it out on the boonies. I mean, way out in the boonies, and then they called it Brasilia, and so that's a kind of a unique situation. But politically speaking, it was East meets West, and that's what he had in mind. And so Constantine then became the ruler of a new place, even though it's the old place. So it's now called the Byzantine Empire, right? There's no Roman Empire after Constantine moved. And then, of course, in 325, he also, you know, one guy did a lot, right? So we have the Council of Nicaea, and the Council of Nicaea, and the Nicene Creed and all that. This Council of Nicaea is where Christian Orthodoxy was established. Basically, if you want to know what the vast majority of Christians believe, you read the Nicene Creed. When Constantine called all of these Roman bishops together among the church, they had a conclave. But he had enormous influence on the outcome of that. And the main outcome was to declare that Jesus was God. Jesus wasn't the Son of God in the sense that he's inferior. He is God in human form. And Mary, of course, his mother, then had to be declared the mother of God. That's the heart and core of Mariology. The whole study, the whole worship of Mary is founded in this idea of the power of Mary, because she gave birth to God. I mean, any of you know the Rosary? Any of you, do you know what the Rosary is? Yeah. So it goes like this: Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God. Right there at the beginning of the Rosary, they tell you, Mother of God. And that came out of because of what happened in Nicaea. Yes, sir.
What was the timing of the Nicene Creed versus the movement to Byzantium?
Yeah. So Byzantium is about 320, I would say. You mean when he moves the capital?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just a little bit before that.
Okay.
And so there in Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire then hangs on for another 1,000 years almost. 1,000 years. When finally the Byzantine Empire is overrun, basically by the Muslim world in the form Ottoman Turks, yeah. And, but before this, but before this happens, Constantine then basically guts the importance of Rome and the importance of the West. So, in other words, your Roman legions are going to defend the capital. Just like in the American Civil War. You know how many forts they built around Washington? It's well over 100 forts they built, armed men, ready to fight to defend Washington. That's what Rome was totally protected by the Roman legions until Constantine, then it just becomes another Roman outpost. And so that's how easily, after that, it's so easy for the Goths, the Vandals, all these Germanic tribes that are coming in from the north and the east, and it makes a huge difference. So the Byzantine church then evolves as a separate entity than what we think of as the Roman Catholic Church, primarily because of language. So the Byzantines are speaking Greek, and Constantine is speaking Greek and Latin. All of these things happen because they moved into the Greek language area, right? And so over time, this becomes a huge split, and it isn't until the 15th century, that they officially divide. It's hard for us to think about it this way. You have a bishop of Rome, you have a bishop in Constantinople or Byzantium. You have these bishops in Bishop of Jerusalem. You have a bishop in I'm trying to think of
Alexandria.
Alexandria, yes. And you have these bishops around. They each have their domain, right? And they have their followers. So even today, the Roman Catholic Church is just following the Bishop of Rome's lead, and that's such an important detail to keep in mind. So the Orthodox, it's called Greek Orthodox because they believe they have the true faith. By the way, one of the big issues of marriage: should a priest be married? Greek Orthodox, yeah, of course, priests should always be married. Roman Catholic Church for 400 to 500 years, they believed that priests should be married. Then in the Middle Ages, they changed. They decide, no, priests shouldn't be married, which has caused all kinds of problems, but we won't get into that. So anyway, all of this is a setup for what I'm about to tell you right now. In 326 AD, you have, I think it's Leo III. Let me check, yeah. It's Leo III. Leo number 3, he's the Byzantine emperor, right? By the way, the Byzantine Empire went all the way over into Italy, and then very, very far to the east, down into Egypt, Alexandria, and then ultimately up to Russia. The Russian Orthodox. The Tsar had the choice. He could have been Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Islam. He had a choice. He said, we're gonna be Orthodox. So that's why the Russian language is based on the Cyrillic. The Cyrillic alphabet is based on the Greek alphabet. And so anyway, Leo III comes to this idea, very common in the Middle Ages, that God is angry and therefore caused all this suffering. And the suffering that happened right at this time was the explosion of the volcano at Santorini. This was such a massive volcanic explosion. It changed the climate for a year. It just covered many, many people. So they said, well, God is punishing us. God is angry. Why is God angry? Well, because we have all these statues and icons we're worshiping, rather than worshiping the true God. So, he said that no more representations of deity of any kind, and this will please God. Well, again, so this again divides the Roman Catholics from the Orthodox. By the way, it didn't last real long time. And if you go to a Greek Orthodox church today, you'll see all kinds of murals and icons, and you'll see God and Jesus and Mary, and you'll see all these images, right? But my favorite, if you go down to the Orthodox Cathedral in Dallas, down near Oak Lawn, if you go down there and you're standing in front of the mirror, you know, there's God and there's Jesus, and this is written in Greek. This is what's written. Theotokos. In Greek, theo, God, tokos, to carry, to bear, to hold God. And of course, it's written right below the image of the Virgin Mary. The one who bore God, not the one who bore Jesus, which is the way Christian Protestants, I think, generally would look at it. No, the one who bore God. And so, this is one of the things they agreed on, that Jesus, Mother of God, right? So, amazing in a way. Now, let's erase all this and then talk about the evolution of iconoclasts, and we will then come to an amazing piece of history. Now, let's jump forward to the Reformation. The Reformation, of course, we always date from 1517, the exact date, October 31st, because Ego All Hallows Day, Luther put up his 95 Theses, wanting to question Roman Catholic doctrine. Now, I would say Martin Luther was not an iconoclast. What he was a man who wanted to return the church to the way it was in the earliest days, before this huge, what he would think of a monstrosity of an organization called the Roman Catholic Church had simply perverted the true teachings of God and the true teachings of the way things should be. So Luther, when he lights the match to a conflagration that was ready to, probably anybody could have started it, but he's in the right place at the right time. And so he creates the evangelical church, and again, the Reform. Now, what happened is people got very hyped up, and they would go into Catholic churches, these reformers, all over the north, Germany, Scandinavia, Holland, Denmark, and then eventually in England. They would go and break up all the saints that people would go and pray to, and smash any image they could find, and so on. So there was some iconoclastic. Luther certainly was not for this. Luther was very much a guy who wanted to keep things as much as the same as possible, but get rid of the bad things that had evolved in the Catholic Church since the early church. He was unsuccessful in this. The thing just took over. And pretty soon other reformers popped up. Two that we want to focus on in particular is Zwingli helmet. Now, Zwingli is a Roman Catholic priest, just like Luther. And Zwingli heard about Luther and his teachings and agreed. And he cranks up churches and starts converting people to this new Protestant movement. And word gets back to Luther that, down in Switzerland we got a guy down there that's starting churches, and he seems to be following your teachings. It'd be good if you guys could meet. Luther was okay with that. Yeah, I'll meet Zwingli. So they meet in a place called Marburg, Germany. I think the reason for Marburg is it's closer to Zwingli. And so Luther goes down there. I think Luther walked. Luther walked a lot. I think he walked to Marburg, and I think Zwingli walked to Marburg. I mean, it took him a long time. And but in those days, you have to remember, horses were very expensive. And Luther certainly knew how to ride a horse, and certainly had been on a horse before. But the Reformation, see, he's cut off from his source of income, which is the Catholic Church, and he was supported, of course. But I think Luther's idea was probably also that he would do some evangelization, missionary work on the way. So anyway, they meet at Marburg, and there's kind of prearranged that they're going to go over 15 points. There's 15 points that represent what would be Luther's teaching. In other words, if they agree on all 15 points, then they will join together in one church. It was Luther's list. So they go down the list. You believe this, you believe that, you believe the other thing. And they got down to number 15. Number 15 was communion, the Eucharist. Now, Zwingli said, the Eucharist is just a symbol of God's love to us. And so he is symbolically showing his grace. I should say, Luther is saying, if I said this wrong, let me say it again. Luther is saying that God is showing his grace by being present. In other words, he's present in the body and blood, which is the bread and the wine. So, first of all, the bread and the wine are symbolic of the body and blood to start with, right? But what Luther was saying is somehow in this bread and wine, God is present. He called it the real presence. You can see he wasn't converted totally over from Catholicism yet. But Zwingli said, no. This is a symbol. It's a very important symbol. It's very much like baptism. You're baptized to symbolize that you have received the grace of God and that you are one of his children. But it's not the baptism, does it? It's your belief, right? By the way, if you go down to the nearest Baptist church, is that across the street? Mm-hmm. You go across the street over there and you say to the pastor, so if I'm baptized, will I be saved? And he'll say, no, not at all. If you convert, if you show that you are giving your life over to Christ, then you'll be saved. The baptism is merely a symbol of that. You're showing the world, the public, everybody, that you are now saved. See? You see this. And so, at that point, Luther and the Baptists are on the same page. So, they agreed then on 14.5 points out of 15. But because they couldn't agree on that last half point about the real present, Zwingli split off, and his follower, Calvin, and all those churches out there that are Presbyterian, Baptist, Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, I mean, they're just endless churches that come off of the Zwingli Calvin movement. All right, now here is what we have to appreciate. The Calvinists, maybe I should talk about Calvin a little bit. So Calvin is a French lawyer who gets caught up in the Protestant thing. And this is really strange. He believed in all 15 of Lutherans. In other words, Calvin was basically a Lutheran, right? But Calvin, in fact, he tried to get the congregations that he was kind of the leader of, he tried to get them to come over to the idea of that God is really present in the community. And they weren't buying it. Because remember, Zwingli, ironically, strange to say, is more Calvinistic than Calvin. Hard to believe, but anyway, here's what happens. Calvinism becomes a huge movement in its own right, starting in Switzerland, because he was basically a French lawyer who had to get out of France to go and find some place where they could take refuge. It turned out to be Geneva, Switzerland. So he spent much of his life in Geneva, Switzerland. In Geneva, Switzerland, he built up what we think of now as the Calvinist movement. And there he was very well liked, although he was a very, very, very strict. And what Calvin created is an organization called the Consistory. Now the Consistory are pastors and men of a congregation whose job it is to try to control the morals and behavior of people in the congregation, right? And they are doing this in a rather dramatic way. So they will keep track of it, what everybody's doing in Geneva, the Calvinists. And if you don't go to church, they'll come and get you. If you say a bad thing about Calvin or the church, they will come and take you and put you in stocks and throw old cabbages at you, that kind of thing. They will, if it's bad enough, if you've done something bad enough, they'll whip you. In other words, it's all about enforcing morality, right? And this morality then is embedded into Calvinism, and then think of all the Calvinist groups, derivative of Calvin. The Puritans, who then were called Congregationalists in America. The Puritans, let's see, off of this come the Baptists. Oh, I forgot the Presbyterians. The Baptists, the Presbyterians, Churches of Christ. there are many others, all right? Now, all of these groups embedded some version of the consistory. The church elders, as they're called, are responsible for the morals of the church. And this got embedded not only in congregational life, but it got embedded in government and governmental practices. So I want to tell you a story. In 1970, I arrived in Oak Cliff in a Volkswagen with everything I owned in the back seat. I wished I had that Volkswagen today. And I wished I only owned as much as I had in the back seat. So I rented a garage apartment in Oak Cliff from a nice lady, and I said to her as I was moving in, do you happen to have a hammer? And she said, yeah, I've got a hammer here somewhere. And I said, you have a nail or two? I want to put some things up, in my little garage apartment. And she finally said, I can't find it. I thought we had a hammer. So I'll tell you what though, you don't have to drive very far. Drive down the end of Cockrell Hill Road and you'll run right smack into Albertsons, Skaggs Albertsons in those days. Famous Mormon grocery store. So it was Sunday. So I drive down and run right into Skaggs Albertsons and walk in. Now, it was Sunday and they should have been closed, but they had a pharmacy. Because they had a pharmacy, they're allowed to be open. But I was there for a hammer, not for pharmacy. So as I walked in, I noticed that it seemed like everything was covered up with plastic. And my first thought was, are they painting? Why would they be painting this place, on a Sunday? It seemed odd. But remember, I'm a newcomer. I don't know anything about what's going on. And so I finally, looked around and found found where the hammers and nails and different things were, screwdrivers, but it was covered up with plastic. So I looked around. Finally, somebody came by that worked there. I said, "Excuse me, I see the hardware here is kind of covered up. I just need a hammer. Can I reach in there and get a hammer?" Now, rather than saying yes, no, whatever, he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Not from here." And he said, "Well, haven't you ever heard of purple laws?" I said, "Yeah, I remember something about purple laws." He said, "Well, today is Sunday, and on Sunday, we can't sell anything in the grocery store or anything in the regular, in the this hardware section. Now we can sell you anything you need health-wise. You need aspirin, we got it." But he said, "This is a state governed by purple laws. So Sunday everything's closed." And by the way, everything was closed, with hardly any exceptions on that day. Well, where did purple laws come from? From a book that Calvin had covered in purple leather, which had all these laws about what you can't do, right? And basically the laws of quote-unquote morality. But because Texas was so dominated by the Baptists and the Churches of Christ and the Presbyterians not the Methodists. Although Methodists were very big on prohibition, huge on prohibition. But they weren't so much on that track. And he said, that man said to me, so in this state, you just have to wait till Monday. And that's when I had my education, right there. Found out about purple laws, the code that had been embedded in the Texas laws, and local laws, right? In fact, this area here was what they called a dry area. All of Oak Cliff was dry area. Then about the 1970s or 80s, maybe later, then they had areas that were opening up. And now I think, is there any dry areas left in the metro? I doubt it, right? There's so much money to be made from alcohol. But like, I live in Irving until only about 15 years ago. You had to drive across the Trinity, and they had all these alcohol stores just across the Trinity. Irving was dry, but then Irving went, and the government became rich over there because all that money that had left is coming back. Now, so purple laws. I want to tell you one more story about this. This is unbelievable what I'm going to tell you. I had a student this fall, and he came in with dreadlocks, and he looked like an Aboriginal from the Melanesia or someplace, right? And so I got to know him, we got to talking, and one day I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "I'm from Papua New Guinea." Now Papua New Guinea is a big island, and it's split. The Papua New Guinea side is now part of Indonesia. Indonesia, by the way, is majority Muslim. And so he said, "I'm from Papua New Guinea." And I said, "So you must be a Muslim." He said, "No, I'm not a Muslim, I'm a Christian." "Oh, really?" "Yeah." He said, we've been Christians for generations. Missionaries came. Now, here it comes. The missionaries came from Holland, right? So they're Dutch missionaries. The Dutch. Now the Dutch, one of the churches I should put down here is Dutch Reform. Dutch Reform. Anybody remember Robert Schuller?
Yeah.
The Crystal Cathedral?
Yeah.
Cal?
Yeah, he was Dutch.
Robert Schuller was Dutch Reform. If you go farther back to my time, the olden days, do you remember a man by the name of Norman Vincent Peale? Pastor of the second oldest church in America, the Marble Collegiate Church in New York. Peale was bigger than big, Dutch Reform. In fact, Norman Vincent Peale was a mentor to Robert Schuller. And this whole prosperity gospel business, which has become so popular, is all derivative of Calvin, because the Calvinists are always capitalists. I mean, historically speaking. It's all about making money. And they had the Dutch, East India Company, yeah. It's in VOB, I think, in Dutch. The Dutch word, I think, are VOB. Anyway, the Dutch East Indies Company. So they took over. They were obsessed with spices because spices were more valuable than gold. Every time I sit down at a table in a restaurant, I see a salt and pepper shaker there. Pepper has this much pepper in it. That's, of course, pepper's very light, but that would be more valuable than gold back in the old days, till the Dutch came in and flooded the world with pepper. Pepper was very rare and very expensive, and they'd have, the rich people would have these pepper pots, very elaborate, and they'd have a little pepper in there, and then each person would take just a little bit, you know. We think of pepper just, you know, just common as dirt, right? And so anyway, they went over there, and they tried to get a monopoly on all the spices they could, cloves, and the one they wanted so badly was nutmeg. Now, nutmeg is only grown in very few places, believe it or not. And that nutmeg was the center of the nutmeg world was a place called Banda. Now, Banda, Indonesia today, Banda is actually a little series of islands, but there's one named Banda. It's kind of like Hawaii is named after one of the big islands, but yeah, the islands around. And the Dutch wanted to control the nutmeg, and the only place that they grew nutmeg they didn't own was Banda Island. Who owned it? The British. So they came to the king's representatives, and they said, we'd like to make a deal. We'd like to maybe buy or trade for Banda Island. And the British said, well, what do you have to offer? And they said, they told them a bunch of islands. One of those was Manhattan Island. You know, Dutch. Remember the Dutch settled. It was New Amsterdam, right? And the Dutch had a big colony there. And so they said, okay, we'll do it, because that works into our plans. You know, they wanted to control the Hudson River and all of that. That works into our plans real well. We'll buy it. So they gave them the Banda. So the Dutch had a monopoly on nutmeg. They may still have it to this day. And the English got what is Manhattan Island. About and so I'll try to get this story out. So I had this student from down in that part of the world, where they grow all this stuff, pepper and so forth. And so I got talking to him about his church. I said, what kind of church you are? And he gave me a name, but I couldn't really understand what he was saying exactly. I said, well, who started this church? Well, long time ago, Dutch missionaries. Amen. And established our church. It was essentially Dutch Reform. And I said, yeah, well, do you still do it in Dutch? No, we do it in our native language. I said, well, what's your services like? He said, well, it's a very, very strict church. And I'm used to it, but it's a very strict church. He said, did you know that we have church police that will come and get us if we aren't in church? The consistory. In other words, those Dutch missionaries told them, this is how you do Christianity. You know, it's very tight, you're very close, everybody's morals are being scrupulously followed at all times. And so he said, we still have them doing that. And there was another student from this very same region, and he also was Christian, but they didn't do that at his church anymore, but they were still doing it. But my point is, those missionaries came 400 years ago, and they implanted the seeds. And because New Guinea was still, to a certain extent, in the Stone Age until about World War II, that they've come out of that now, but they still have these old practices. Oh, by the way, speaking of Dutch, I just learned yesterday this. This is one of these trivial things that I love to throw in, and since I have one more minute. Here's a Dutch name. Vanderbilt, get it? Vanderbilt? Vanderbilt University,
Yeah.
you know, and so forth. Dutch, from New York. Van is royalty, or aristocracy. And so if you're van somebody in Dutch, we used to have cookies called Vandicap? No, those are beans. Isn't that right? Vandicap beans, pork and beans?
Yeah.
Vandicap. So that's, you know, aristocracy in Holland. So Van, whereas in German, it's going to be von. Otto von Bismarck, right? The great unifier of Germany. Okay, so here's the setup then. These Calvinists were to the core iconoclasts, all of them. You go into a Baptist church, they walk across the street. See how many paintings, how many statues. They're usually, in fact, your basic primitive Baptist, your basic hardcore Puritans. You go up to England, you'll see this. In every little town up there, a little white church. You go inside, it's just plain, no altar, no nothing, other than maybe a place for the pastor to sit and a pulpit of some kind. That's amazing.
And maybe a cross.
Yeah, often a cross, although, you know, Mormons who come out of Calvinism and Baptist particular and churches of Christ, Mormons will never allow a cross. And so you go to a Mormon church, look for the cross. Good luck. It's not there.
Now, the Dutch were also very present in Africa as well.
Hugely.
Because of the spice and because of the
Gold.
wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, gold and, yeah.
Well, you know, the Boer War, for example, 1900, is entirely about who's going to control the gold of South Africa. The English needed it, the Dutch needed it.
Yeah.
They fought, you know, those Boers. Boers are the name of South Africans who speak Dutch. They're called Afrikaners. And they, tough. And they just about defeated the English, but the English had more resources, more guns, and they survived. But that, you know, South Africa today includes those Dutch communities of the Transvaal and Orange Free State and all this kind of thing. So we get far afield, don't we? Far afield. Thank you for having me. And I look forward now. We're gonna tent next week to show some slides. This will be an experiment, and so just stay tuned. And I also have, you know, quite a bit of text to talk to you about without showing the slides. So I hope you can come.
We will.
You might learn something.
We will be here.
Okay.
That you didn't expect.
All right. Well,
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before